AVCT has been a volatile stock that attracted a huge amount of attention and hope over the past few weeks and months. Lots of speculations have been said and done to the company ever since, and many are still wondering what lies ahead for AVCT. Well, actually, they hope that in the end of the road, there's going to be a generous buyout. And in this video, we will talk about what is going on with AVCT recently, what should we do about it, and for how much. So as always, if you appreciate what I do, please consider to drop a like, subscribe to my channel, and check out the links in the description. Before we begin the video, I'd just like to state a brief disclaimer, which may clarify what this video is for and what it is not for. What is presented in this video are going to be my opinion or my interpretations on how things are and will be. They should not be considered as investment advice and should be watched for entertainment purposes only. They may be able to help you to make more educated decisions, but shouldn't be used as the only material for the decision making. Most of my analysis is done in the immediate past or just a few days before the uploading of those videos, and the price action that you may see could no longer reflect the price chart. But that is okay, because the point of showing a chart is to show you what does the past suggest for the future. And we can then see, with some benefit of hindsight, whether I'm right or not. And these kinds of analysis are also relevant for the future. So it doesn't really matter if they reflect the latest, like the latest pin bars or not. Also, the analysis will try to cover the stock as comprehensively as possible, and it's going to talk about more factors than just the latest news or price actions. So, for instance, we may talk about the company's financials, stock market trends, the long-term perspectives, and the shareholder behaviors that are going to affect the timing, the quantity, and the actual decision. Since most of the viewers are watching my videos for the first time, it is important for them to consider all these factors. So with that being said, let's begin with today's video. Simply put, AVCT is a cloud-based service provider wanting to profit from the bandwagon of virtualization of work environment and to facilitate communications between individuals. With that being said, the sector does have its potential, for sure, but it also has its risks. Most services in the sector tend to be either free or freemiums. People have been conditioned to always seek the cheapest option, or to simply mold their work behaviors and habits to accommodate the tools rather than the other way around. Now, this is for personal clients. For corporate clients, they might be willing to pay, but their demands are often met with applications from bigger fish already, who have the means to provide additional support and additional customizations, which smaller companies may not have the scale or the means to provide. Also, larger corporations provide a layer of reliability for the corporate clients, as they may trust that these platforms would be here to stay. The last point is a key factor that may explain why AVCT didn't really have the success it hoped to have during the years it's been operating. The decision then arrived in summer of 2022, so this year, to sell the company, and this really has only reinforced my assertion before, that, once a buyout occurs, what's going to happen to my account? What's going to happen to the system that I have already established? So if that's the case, why wouldn't I just use something from Microsoft or Google? This would be the kind of reaction that people are reasonably expected to have. With that being said, the current attraction of AVCT is the possibility to be sold to a generous buyer who has the money to dole out in exchange of AVCT's client base. This expectation for a large buyout premium justifies the interest that traders have towards AVCT. Whether it's reasonable or not, that is another discussion. Over the past few weeks, the share price fell lower to one point, and then the price action is mainly sustained by the likelihood of a satisfactory buyout price within a reasonable time frame. The scenario hasn't occurred thus far, and with that, when most of the upward momentum AVCT has accumulated thus far, it is obvious that time might be running out for AVCT to profit from the recent uptick in interest. Stock is currently hovering around 95 cents, which is disappointing when we know that a company recently just went through a reverse stock split to keep the stock price above $1. A reverse stock split reduces the number of shares while preserving the equity value, so that each share trades at a higher individual price. The purpose of this action is to prop up the individual share price so that the stock remains above the Nasdaq's requirement to trade above the $1 a share price. Usually, companies with actual operations that make money will work double shifts to make sure that more people are encouraged to buy their shares either through PR campaigns or bullish announcements. If there's neither, then the company might choose to use a reverse stock split. It would suggest that a company is short on time or that it doesn't really have a positive news to announce, but still needs to do what is needed to remain listed on the Nasdaq. In the case of AVCT, it is probably for both reasons that AVCT, decided to do a reverse stock split. On the other hand, the fundamentals can only explain things to a certain extent. Recently, there is renewed interest and demand in AVCT shares, with the stock going back above $1 level for some time. And this would be a very significant milestone for the company. And it's interesting to see how the stock would manage to just get higher by itself without significant news announcements. So, at some point, the company's stock price, like AVCT share price, went down to as low as 80 cents after the stock split. So with that in mind, I would say that, even if it went up by 10 cents and still below $1, it's still a significant feat in this kind of context. The long-term price action of AVCT has been under duress as well. The company went public in the worst of the time around March 2020, as the world economies began to shut down, causing a major stock crash. Although the share price for many other titles climbed back afterwards, AVCT was not that lucky. During the boom years of 2020 and 2021, AVCT gained back some of the initial losses, but that wasn't enough to attract additional people in a sustained manner, and that the capital it raised wasn't able to cover the expenses. Looking back, the company tried to succeed in a highly competitive sector, but it wasn't able to sustain its presence, and the unfavorable market timing also accelerated the scenario of where we are today. Looking ahead, AVCT is now trying to sell itself, and just like the short-term price action, the road ahead largely depends on how well and how soon the buyout occurs, if it occurs at all, that is. The aligned footprint of AVCT is relatively bare bones, most of them made of the company's own PR releases, the very occasional mentions from shareholders on online forums expressing their hope that things are going to go well, and various speculations about who the buyer might be. For now, people say that it might be Microsoft, but we're not sure yet. What we can gather from all this is that the company is getting as much interest as it should, and that it can be pretty meager at times. But this is not unexpected for a small company that has been sold. There's very likely a buyer with whom negotiations are underway. The fact that no one is officially announcing anything may suggest that the negotiations are not going super well for AVCT, or that they simply want to prepare a surprise for the shareholders. I think that it's probably the first scenario that is more realistic. Regarding the macroeconomic factors, it is affecting AVCT perhaps in a more significant manner than it would affect other companies, because the quantity of money that is flowing around in the financial system is greatly reduced. partially due to the end of quantitative easing, looming recession, the massive capital flight to other safe havens, and the conflicts around the world. Those factors affect AVCT in one way or another, but the biggest impact would be how much capital the buyers may have on hand if and when they decide to buy the company. With that being said, let's also take a quick look at the company's financials. Despite the fact that AVCT has been sold, they're still going to tell us something. First of all, the cash reserve. The amount has been decreasing over time, currently kept at a level mostly due to equity dilutions. In other words, they've been selling the shares in order to prop up the cash positions. When they sold another piece of the business back in late 2021, the financial statements dwindled significantly. It's not going to affect the financial positions as much, but it does affect the financial ratios and how much they can sell the remainder of the business for. Now, there are currently around $63 million of debt, and $22 million of which is current debt that is due within a year. This would mean that on top of the operating losses AVCT may occur over the next 12 months, there will be at least another $22 million less from the cash reserves. So, if the sale takes longer than a year, AVCT might be forced to go through another round of dilutions. Now, in terms of the profitability, it's not that well either. The revenue has been going down, likely because of the expectation that services might be discontinued once the buyout is completed. The business that they sold back in 2021 let go about half of their expenses, but also about 80% of their revenue. So overall, it's a bad transaction per se, but it might have been useful to buy themselves some additional time. Meanwhile, there could be another $10 million of operating losses outside of the current liabilities, which could trigger further dilutions. So overall, I would say that for AVCT, time is definitely ticking, and it's ticking fast. So they need to find a buyer to avoid being liquidated, or a complete loss of shareholders' faith in the company. There's currently around 35% of institutional buyers suggesting that there is some long-term trust into the company's operations' future outlooks. In this case, I believe that this suggests that there is still some optimism from the institutions that there will be a buyout that's generous enough to make everyone whole. Given that AVCT continued its sell-off, I believe that the retail traders are jumping the ship in great numbers. But institutional buyers so far have remained in place for the most part, not just because they might be more optimistic, but because their position size allows them to be more patient or stoic about the price action. Now, regarding the potentials for short squeeze and the short size, I would say that there is a certain potential, or at least it's significant for AVCT, but given how low the stock price already fell to, I'm not sure and wholly convinced that going short on AVCT right now is the best idea. So a short squeeze is to squeeze out the people who are shorting the stock by buying up the share price, which may force a redemption. A redemption acts as a purchase in the open market, and this will prop up the price on top of the existing dynamic. So currently, there's around 840,000 shares been shorted for AVCT. That amount is significant, but it's not the only indication that there might be some potential for an actual short squeeze. The company has an institutional ownership of 125%. This suggests that the surplus of shares is the result of short selling amongst different stakeholders. There might be a potential play with AVCT when it comes to short selling, although the main incentive to own AVCT is still the possibility to benefit from a generous buyout. Overall, my recommendation on AVCT is to either stay aside because you're not used to this level of risk and uncertainty, or to enter into a trade now. In the expectation of a buyout, in the scenario of a buyout, it would be a very important thing to place yourself early enough to benefit from like the eventual takeoff or whatever, like the either a takeoff or a recovery. So this is in the scenario of if AVCT actually gets sold. Now keep in mind that if it doesn't, or if it hasn't announced that they have entered into like advanced level discussions with a potential buyer and then the whole thing fell through, this is going to hurt the stock, like the share price, and badly. So we definitely have to be ready for this scenario as well. With that being said, I would say that this absolutely has to reflect in how much share you're willing to buy. Don't remortgage your house and put everything on AVCT and hope for a generous buyout. I would say that if you decide to buy AVCT, hold the stock for maybe a few months, like 3 to 6 months, and then try to find an exit window. The maximum exposure I would recommend is between 0.5 and 1% of your portfolio.